Awesome to be here. Thank you. And thank you for your interest in this topic and this wonderful group. Look, like you, a generation or so ago, my wife and I, we climb mountains, we travel around the world. We have been passionate about wilderness and the outdoors my whole life. And second passion has been energy. You know, as you travel to climb and adventure, you know, whether I did that in Africa or South America or remote in Alaska, we see people that live just dramatically different lives than we do. And why? Well, yeah, there's a few reasons why, but the foundational reason why is energy. They have less energy than we do. Of the people in this room, about 1 billion people live remotely like we do. We wear fancy clothes and change them every day, and we get on motorized transport, and we get on a bus or a plane to go visit our family or our relatives. We got light switches at home and refrigeration to keep our food good longer. Like, that's pretty awesome. That's the modern world. About 1 billion of the world's 8 billion people have that much energy to live like us. So I would say my passion in a nutshell is the other 7 billion, they want what we have. I haven't met all of them, but I've yet to meet one that doesn't want what we have. And on the lower end, there's about 2 billion people, so a quarter of humanity, that live like our ancestors did a few generations ago, which means they cook their daily meals and keep their homes or huts warm by burning wood or solid biomass. That's what powered the world throughout all of human history. That's enormously time intensive. It kills 2 to 3 million people a year from indoor air pollution. I view it as the largest, easily solvable problem. 2 to 3 million preventable deaths every year. And it's just because they don't have a propane cook stove, they burn wood. It's also incredibly oppressive to women, because in traditional societies, women gather the wood, women tend the fires, women wake up hours early to get the fire stoked up. A stove not only gives better air quality, which is my motivation for it, but why do people in Africa switch to clean cooking fuel? It isn't mainly about clean air quality. That's a problem down the road. It's because it changes their lives. It gives them time back. They can turn on a stove and turn off a stove, and they get hours a day back. That's the consumer pull for it. So for the dialogue with Chris, a couple things about energy. So to me, the simple thing is we need a lot more energy. 15 years ago, the world consumed about 500 exajoules of energy per year. Exajoule is a one with a lot of zeros. 18 joules per year. Today, the world consumes about 600 exajoules per year. So that's progress. 120% growth, 100 more exajoules of energy, and global demand for energy has actually grown at a pretty common pace, 1.6% compound annual growth rate for 50 years, a little faster in the last 20 years, 1.7% compound annual growth rate. So I always roll my eyes when I see these projections that energy demand's about to peak out, it's about to plateau. I'm like, did someone talk to those 7 billion people? Like, are you good just staying where you are? You don't want to change? Like, no one's good with that. So demand for energy grows. So where did that last 100 extra exajoules come from? We were at 500, so forget that. We'll keep those same sources for that 500. Where did that last 100 of additional energy come from? And it's too big of a room for me to ask everyone, but what's the fastest growing energy source in the world in terms of absolute energy addition? It's a runaway winner by far, natural gas. 40% of all the growth in energy over the last 15 years came from natural gas. Second fastest growing source of energy in the world over the last 15 years, oil. And the biggest surprise might be the third fastest growing source of energy in the world, coal. In the last 15 years, wind does come in fourth as 9% of the incremental energy that's been added. Solar comes in sixth, hydro comes in fifth. But to me, what matters is massively more energy and energy that's affordable, reliable, and fits the need. Like if you need clean cooking fuels in your hut, so solar doesn't work. We can't get enough energy and a high enough temperature to cook or heat from that. Wind doesn't work because it doesn't scale to hut size. But of course, if you're on a remote island and you're trying to get electricity and it all comes from diesel, if you get some solar panels, you can burn less diesel and save money. So there's different energy answers for different places. I'll end by saying 2 things matter with energy to me, 2 things. One is humans. The reason we care about energy is because it changes people's lives. It allows people to live like us. Humans and math. The math has to work. Not it feels good, it sounds good, I like it, my dad used to work in, or this and that. It's the math. What's the most effective way, greatest bang for the buck, to lift up the quality of life of humans? And quality of life means more than just the energy. There's trade-offs. Every energy source has negative environmental impacts and positive impacts. It's that whole package. But I'm going to invite my friend Chris back up on stage, and we'll have a little dialogue and maybe take some audience questions as well. Thank you again for being at this event.
Well, thank you very much. I think the last time we did something like this, I got to call you Chris, but now I have to call you Secretary Wright. A lot changes in 6 months, right?
Well, now I'm the other Chris.
There you go. One of the themes that we've talked a lot about today, and like you said it very aptly, is we need more energy, period. One of the other parts of that is the fact that we've made it very difficult to get more energy, produce more energy, transport more energy. That's one of the big things this administration has focused on. One of the first things that you've done with DOE is also talk about the importance of American exports of LNG and making it easier to do that. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on permitting reform in addition to making it easier to export LNG? What are you doing at DOE to help make that happen, and how can we be working with Congress to do some of that as well?
Yeah, permitting reform is simply huge. This issue's broad. You know, it's biggest in energy, but it is true in other areas as well. You know, look at this spectacular train station we're in. And when you travel around this country, think of the Golden Gate Bridge or highways. Like, America became what we are today because we built big things. Bold people raised money, could be government money, could be private money, and we built things. We built the Trans-Alaska Pipeline from the North Slope of Alaska down to the coast of Alaska to export oil in less than 2.5 years. Less than 2.5 years through 800 miles of wilderness. The high-speed train in California, they've been working on for 16 years, and they don't have 1 mile of track down. So that's the issue of permitting reform. We've made our country, it's easy to stop someone from doing something, and it's hard to do something. And what happens there is you become stagnant. You can't have new energy or new technologies or new access or new anything if you can't build it. And I'll end with, like, the classic example of this is one of the first people I met in the new job was the governor, Democratic governor of Connecticut, pulled up a chair right next to me and said, "We need cheap gas in Connecticut. I got among the most expensive electricity in the country. People pay a lot to heat their homes. I can't get any businesses to expand or new businesses to relocate because I can't deliver them cheap energy." Don't they have cheap gas in Pennsylvania? Absolutely they do. And of course he knew the answer. The answer was just a pipeline from Pennsylvania to Connecticut to bring gas there. And of course these projects were planned, and then, you know, the previous governor of New York just stopped them, just ended them. So 6 states in New England and New York State have much more expensive energy than they should. So yeah, we need to be able to build things of all kinds in this country. Sensible, expeditious environmental reviews, and then a project can go forward or not. But today, if you want to stop a project, it doesn't even have to be bad. You don't have to prove it's bad. You can just tie it up in litigation, and if it's going to take 5 or 10 years to start it, no one's going to even try.
Obviously, permitting reform is about energy exploration, about energy production, transportation. There's also other elements that come into it, whether it's mining the critical minerals that we need or other dimensions to this conversation. And I think one of the things that you've recognized in the past is there's a lot you can do and the administration can do, but there's also only so much the administration can do. You're going to need Congress to act on a lot of this, and you're also going to need to find a way to get to 60 votes in the Senate to be able to codify a lot of this. How are you working with Congress to try and make sure that we do get meaningful, comprehensive permitting reform this administration?
Okay, great question. So right now, the work on the reconciliation package that's going on, there is some permitting stuff in here, not broad-based, but there's meaningful permitting stuff in here, and it could pass with 51 votes in the Senate. To get the broader package, we need 60 votes. So that won't be this summer, but that will be this administration. In fact, that'll hopefully be later this year. That is certainly the plan and the goal. The other thing that I would say that's good about permitting reform today is it's becoming bipartisan. More and more, I would say this being reasonable and thinking about humans and math, that's becoming bipartisan as well, slowly, but it's becoming bipartisan. So I have more optimism now than maybe years ago that there will be a way to get permitting reform done. Now, I'm no expert politician, but it is a priority to be able to build things in our country again, and there are enough people focused on it. I hope we get something done late this year.
And one of the things that you've especially singled out at us as us wanting to build more in this country is nuclear energy. We've talked about this kind of new golden age for nuclear in America. There's been some very exciting executive orders very recently. Could you maybe recap for the room the highlights from the executive orders, but then crucially to the prior point, what can we be doing with Congress to help codify some of that going forward as well?
Yeah, so look, when I was 17 years old, I went off to college specifically to work on nuclear energy. Because the mania when I was a kid, it may sound familiar, was that the world was going to come to the end in 15 or 20 years, and hydrocarbons were the problem. The story then was that we were running out of them, and you can't have industrial civilization without hydrocarbons, because they were mid 80% of global energy, same as they are today. But the belief then was we're running out of them, and therefore standards of living would peak around the year 2000 and then decline. That wasn't acceptable to me. So I went to college to work on nuclear energy. I worked in solar in graduate school. I was just, you can't have a great world without energy. So nuclear, the technology is phenomenal. You know, high energy density, small amount of land, small amount of materials, 24/7, whether the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. You can get high temperature process heat out of it. So not just electricity, you can also use it for manufacturing. So much upside in nuclear. Here's the downside. It was 6% of global energy in the year 2000. Today it's 4%. It hasn't shrunk, but it hasn't grown, and the energy pie keeps growing. So we need to get nuclear going again. But when nuclear started to build commercial nuclear reactors, say in the late 50s, in the next 20 years, we started over 100 of them. 20% of U.S. electricity, not energy, but 20% of the electricity sector, just off to a rocket ship start. A couple bad events that were bad, but didn't have large environmental or human impacts, except for Chernobyl over in Russia, but not here in the U.S., not in the Western world. But it turned everyone fearful. It's much easier to scare people than to reassure them. And nuclear just got stopped in its tracks. And if you stop an industry for 30 years, 30 plus years, you don't get innovation. We don't get young people like you going into that industry, driving it forward again. So we've lost the supply chain. We've lost the ability to do it efficiently. There is zero uranium enriched in the United States by American companies for American power production. Unbelievable. We enrich uranium for our own weapons program, but not for our power plants. And only a third of the uranium we use in our reactors is even enriched on our soil, but by overseas companies, but on our soil. So and the new generation of reactors use a thing called HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, but it's basically higher enrichment than today's reactors. You can get more energy out of a smaller package and they can run longer. It's really the way to go. But so in the executive orders, we've got to have some economic incentives. We've got to stir our nuclear industry back to life. We got to enrich uranium in the United States. We got to build a supply chain again. We got to get shovels in the ground building these next generation of reactors. And when you're building the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in an industry that hasn't done anything for 30 years, it's not going to be cheap. They're not going to be cost competitive with today's energy things. But to me, the key difference is they can be cost competitive. If we get nuclear up in scale and that supply chain and innovation goes on, I believe nuclear will be a huge energy source decades and centuries into the future, but we got to get that ball moving again. And so the president signed a number of executive orders to make it faster to permit plants, to use DOE lands to build test reactors. We're going to have test reactors running, in 18 months out at the Idaho National Labs. I've released HALEU, this uranium fuel, to 5 different commercial providers. So we're doing everything possible. It has to be driven by commercial businesses, but we're going to give every government regulatory financial incentive nudge to get nuclear going again. And then I think it can run by itself, but we got to get it started.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And similar to the question about permitting reform, would you like to see a specific nuclear package in Congress or something that would codify some of these efforts? Or do you think, what do you think is necessary on that front?
There was a couple acts in Congress, in the last 18 months, one that allocated some money to help get the uranium fuel enrichment supply going. So we're just trying to figure out what's the best way to deploy that capital. It is a bipartisan issue in Congress today. There is relatively broad bipartisan support for nuclear. So ultimately, we've got to reform some agencies. I think that can be done without congressional involvement, but there will be a congressional role for sure in nuclear. So I make a point of always talking about it. And there are opponents of it, but I would say they're in the House and the Senate, but they're vastly outnumbered by the supporters.
So we've talked about permitting, generally speaking. We've talked about nuclear as another example of technology that's been held back by red tape. Something else that you've mentioned in the past is the importance of transmission infrastructure, right? So a panelist earlier today said that one of the problems is not actually being able to get the energy, it's to be able to get the energy from A to B, get it on the grid, have the electrons flowing. And you had a secretarial order about transmission. Could you talk a little bit about why you think transmission is such an important part of energy build-out and the work that you guys are doing on that?
Oh, wow. Well, transmission, this is maybe the poster child of it's hard to build big things in the United States. If I put up a map of how many miles of transmission we have built in our country over the last 40 years, you'll just see a nosedive in the last 10 years. It is crazy hard to build transmission projects. And so, frankly, for the AI race we're in right now, that was on my list. We got to get transmission up and going. I'm now a believer that almost all the critical time period for the AI thing will happen before any meaningful transmission gets built. I hate to say that, and I'm working hard to make it easier to build transmission, but if now it takes 20 years, we've got to do a lot of great stuff to make people build something in 10 years, that transformation to our economy, our world, and science from AI, it's going to happen in less than 10 years. So the short run things we can do, number one is power lines have a rated amount of current that can go through them, and that's the current they do. And of course, it's designed by when it's really hot out, so the lines are already going to stretch, and there's no wind blowing for any cooling effect, and it's about line sag. Well, we're going to put some sensors on the lines, and if you got wind blowing or if it's not super hot, you can run more current through that line. So in the short term, we're going to get more out of existing lines. That's just instrumentation and intelligence. There's also awesome new cables. You can take down the cable that's there and replace it with a copper fiber and higher conducting cable around it, and you can get twice as much power through the same right-of-way. So things that don't require a new right-of-way, a new permitting, a new fighting across state lines, we're going to make the existing transmission infrastructure much more effective, while in parallel working on transmission permitting. But that one's been intractable. We're going to make progress, but I think it's not going to be a major factor in the next 5 years. Not that we're not going to work on it, but I just can't find anyone optimistic that can tell me they can build something inside of 5 years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we should mention, obviously, that the Loan Programs Office, which is under your jurisdiction, has supported transmission projects, and they're making some progress there, so hopefully we'll see some things come out of that. And speaking of the LPO, Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation in DC in the last 6 months about this idea of a sovereign wealth fund and kind of what the role of government is in stimulating those big, beautiful things that we want to build in this country, that we need to build in this country. Transmission is one of those. We've talked about nuclear, advanced geothermal, critical mineral mining and processing in the United States. The LPO is one of the most lean and efficient funding mechanisms that we have in this country to help make that happen. So we'd love to get your thoughts on kind of the role that you see LPO playing in this energy dominance kind of conversation and where we need to be heading.
So the Loan Program Office is a great tool. If we're going to launch nuclear, it's going to be large hyperscaler brand name companies that are going to bring equity capital in, but these first plants are going to be expensive. The best way to get shovels in the ground is to provide some low-cost debt on top of that. I'm anxious to do that. Got to be backed up by equity. Got to believe the American taxpayers are going to get their money back. Those opportunities are there in nuclear. They're definitely there in transmission. There's a couple of projects we're already engaged with. So there are transmission projects going on. There's a fantastic entrepreneur, John Arnold in Houston, he's on a mission to make our grid better. He's been done very well in business. He's doing this for a mission now. I love that guy. And he's a partner with us on some of these projects. So the Loan Program Office is an efficient tool, but right now it's got a very, very bad name. The Loan Program Office has been around for a little more than 15 years. And its first 15 years, it lent $42 billion. $42 billion is a lot of money. Some of those were busts, some of those were good, but $42 billion in 15 years. We had an election last November. President Trump got elected. The day after he got elected, until he got inaugurated, 76 days, the Loan Program Office put out $90 billion of loans. Twice what they did in 15 years. They changed the clause and removed the cancellation clause. If they don't meet any of their hurdles and they're a train wreck happening, still can't cancel their loan. So the Loan Program Office was wildly abused irresponsibly. So understandably, a lot of people in Congress don't like it, and they're mad about the use of it, and they should be mad about the use of it. So I'm in a little bit of a negotiation trying to keep it around, because to responsibly use it, we can help with the transmission projects that are moving forward. We can help get the nuclear ball going, critical minerals, all the things you mentioned. It's the most efficient way to do it. Instead of government matching funds, it's cheaper to do loans if you underwrite the loans intelligently. You only do it to companies with a good credit rating, very high likelihood of the American taxpayers coming back. It's an effective tool. And it will be around. The question is just going to be the scale and scope of how much we can do with the Loan Program Office. But everything we do will be underwritten carefully as if those American taxpayer dollars were our own, because part of them are our own. But it needs to be used responsibly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in this room have appreciated your leadership on LPO, specifically when you're in front of Congress, kind of pointing out that you need things like the credit subsidy to keep this program afloat and actually invest in the projects that you want. And just because a prior administration might have invested in things that were maybe less careful, doesn't mean we can't use it as a tool for the energy imperatives, nuclear, transmission, geothermal, critical minerals, all the things that we need. So thank you for your leadership on that. LPO is a very interesting thing to talk about with you because we've known each other for a while. I know you're a pretty free market guy. I'm curious, what is your thought on the role of government and industrial policy in meeting kind of this energy imperative moment? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So to meet the energy challenge, last 4 years, we grew our production of electricity by about 2% over 4 years, and prices went up on average 25%. That to me is clearly an F. That's failure. In the next 4 years, we've got to grow electricity production by a lot, but we got to stop the price rise, because then consumers are mad and they're going to hate reshoring of manufacturing and AI if electricity prices continue to go up. Chris, this I think we can address mostly by regulatory, getting out of the way, permitting it so people can build new power plants, they can connect things. We got to reform FERC a little bit so the economics are there to build power fast to connect to your data center. This will be mostly market forces, almost entirely market forces. But you mentioned one other thing, critical minerals, critical materials. So China has had a policy for decades now, rare earth elements, right? And they're rare is the wrong name. They're all over the place, but they're in very low concentration. So it takes a lot of money, a lot of materials, a lot of chemicals to refine these things, but they have massive benefits in magnets. Magnets that would work great at room temperature don't work good at high temperature. That just limits the application of magnets. With these rare earth elements, you can make high-performance magnets work at very high temperatures. They're in your iPhones, they're in jet planes, they're in cars, they're in everything. China has gone about building the refining for rare earth elements, getting offtake mining agreements, building mines in China, mostly outside of China. And then they've kept the price low. So if one of us, you and I go and we open a rare earth element and we're starting to build our mine, they're going to crater the price for long enough that no one's going to fund us. That's a crappy business. I'm not putting my money in that. And that's what they've done for 10 or 20 years. So guess what? They own the entire supply chain. And as you're probably reading in newspapers right now, they can say, They have huge leverage, which is why they did this, huge geopolitical leverage. So that's not economic reasons. It's not that big of an industry. It's only a few $100 million a year in revenue from the sale of the magnets themselves. So this is where we need to do a little bit of industrial policy where we're going to build in place offtake agreements and incentives so that things that are critical to our economy and our national security do get built in the United States, do get mined and processed and refined in the United States. So you're right, I'm a lifelong capitalist and free market guy, but for national security reasons, we do need a role for the government to play to reshore these critical industries.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Last question from me, and then we'll go to a few questions from the audience. This might be difficult to answer, but what are you most excited about in the energy industry right now?
Oh, just so much upside, so much upside. You know, look, as I mentioned before, natural gas is the fastest growing energy source in the world. Like, it's going to bring massively growth in industry, lowering heating costs, improving people's lives, not just in this country, but everywhere. And the United States is just by far and away the biggest producer of natural gas. We produce roughly as much natural gas as number 2, number 3, and number 4 combined. And soon will be almost 50% of global exports of natural gas. Soon, meaning several years. But this is a great American advantage. You go back 15 years ago, we were the largest importer of natural gas in the world. We were drilling with over 1,000 rigs to try to get natural gas. Our production was declining. The prices were more than twice as high as they were today, and we were the world's biggest importer with over 1,000 rigs. Today, there's 100 rigs drilling for natural gas in the United States. So think about that shrunk environmental footprint, 100 rigs versus 1,000 rigs. We've doubled our production, gone from the world's largest importer to the world's largest exporter, and the price has been cut in half. Like, that's progress. I'd love to see a story like that about nuclear. 10 or 15 years from now, we've just turned nuclear around, and it's cheap, or reliable, and it's growing. So there's so much upside we can do with energy simply by getting out of the way. I don't have to shake down everyone and get money and promises. I've just got to bring back a more sane regulatory form and get out of the way. And great capitalists are developing next generation geothermal. This is incredibly exciting. Next generation nuclear. Solar, without the subsidies, solar is still going to grow. And if we can get energy storage better and cheaper than we have it today, it'll grow even more. So there's a lot. Fusion. I went to college to work on fusion energy 40 plus years ago. In the next 4 years, we are going to see the technology of very positive energy out of fusion, and from there it's just commercialization business. So, and AI is going to transform how science is performed and the productivity of everyone in this room. So I couldn't think of a 4 more exciting year period to move to DC.
Awesome, we're glad to have you. All right, we'll go to some audience questions. Please put up your hand if you have a question. I think we have a floating mic over here. I can't really see much with these bright lights, but just someone over there.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us this afternoon. I just wanted to ask, we really appreciate your comments on the need for nuclear energy and reliable baseload growth for this next stretch of 10 years. And I think with geothermal, there's some really exciting integrated innovation as well, even potential terawatt power from geothermal, integrating fusion, for example, into drilling. Companies like Quaise Energy are now doing that. With nuclear, you've spoken to the importance of LPO and tax credits there. Do you see that same importance for geothermal in terms of making baseload grow again in America with the tax credits?
I do. Very, very much so. In fact, my advice, I don't have a vote in the House or the Senate, but my advice to everyone is to get rid of virtually all of the energy tax credits. There's ones that are targeted to oil and gas now I'm a free market guy. I don't want distortions in the marketplace. My recommendation has been to leave behind the equivalent of the wind and solar tax credits if you start construction by 2031 for nuclear, fission and fusion, and geothermal. Those are three energy sources that can provide energy 24/7, 365. And if you do the math, they have a pathway to become completely cost competitive. They're not going to start that way, but they can get there. So yes, nuclear, fusion, fission.
Thanks very much for being here, Mr. Secretary. Thomas Phillips with Patel. I really appreciated your comments, particularly about this building, Union Station. I'm not sure if folks are familiar, but out front, there's a series of six statues, the progress of railroading. And it talks about how those are enabled. Things like energy, mechanic arts, agriculture, all the progress that we've made as a nation are enabled by freedom and imagination. And you've touched on the freedom piece, permitting reform, things that make it easier for us to produce energy. But I'm curious about imagination. What role do you see basic science research, fundamental science research, and the federal government's role in basic science research advancing our energy goals?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Because, yeah, look, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, right? I've been in business, and I've been an innovator. And as Chris said, maybe in a blind squirrel finds nut, helped play a role in launching the shale revolution. So I love innovation. And to me, that's freedom and marketplaces drive innovation. But to understand what dark matter is, what's the origin of our cosmos, what's the structure of a nucleus, what's the top quark, and how did this come to be? There are so many very basic, big picture scientific questions, and no company is going to fund that. That's just not what you do. But we are humans. We want to understand how the world works. That essence of understanding ultimately will translate to innovation, but we don't even know the length of the time frame. But I'm very passionate about the basic fundamental sciences that's done in the national labs. They are the greatest scientific institutions on our planet. They're the biggest Nobel Prize factories. So I'm very passionate. This is a role of government. And it is, compared to the whole government's budget, it's tiny. But if not for federal funding, that basic science progress does not happen. And I am passionately defending that and will successfully defend that. But yes, you go around and visit our national labs and hear what they're doing, you will be inspired.
Got time for one more?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. One more.
Hello, Mr. Secretary. Thank you so much for being here. Emmett Penny, FAI. I've been a huge fan of yours since I heard you on my friend Robert Bryce's podcast. Earlier this year, you mentioned, at least through the Twitter account, that the prices of oil don't necessarily encourage expansion of the drilling fleet. And I know that much of our natural gas supply comes from associated drilling. So from a grid security perspective, I'm wondering if the DOE is worried about any sort of price shocks or anything like that that could impact what is already painful prices nationwide or perhaps supply nationwide.
Did you say, was that Emmett Penny?
Yes, sir.
Oh, we've got to meet. I've followed you from a distance for a long time as well. So I'm glad you're here. I got to talk to you after I'm done, after I'm off the stage. But I worry deeply about the security of our electricity grid and the price of our electricity grid. It is a slow-moving, complicated ship. I think we're doing incrementally positive changes. But in the short run, demand could grow faster than supply grows, and we have risks there. So I'm very worried about electricity prices and grid stability. I think we're going to do the right things to get that ship moving in the right direction. But maybe the specific question, am I worried about a shortage or tight supply of natural gas? I'm not worried about that. Emmett did make a good point. Oil prices are going down, which means rigs drilling for oil are going down, which means the associated gas that comes out as sort of a byproduct of oil production, that is indeed going down. But with shale technology, it is so easy to produce natural gas that it's very, we don't need much of a price signal at all. The Haynesville in Texas or Mid-Con in Oklahoma or the Northeast, it's so easy to grow U.S. natural gas production that it's pretty hard for any sustained period, meaningfully move up U.S. natural gas prices. So I'm not worried about natural gas prices. I am worried about electricity prices. That's the short answer.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We're out of time, but this was great. First day was very, very good here. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for applause.